Hello and welcome to another motorcycle video. This video was shot on Sunday the 19th of March 2023 was started at North Ballarat, as you could see in the title, and it was part of the Black Dog one-day ride from North Ballarat football ground in Victoria around the northwest, I guess would be the best way to describe it, of Victoria, through Creswick, Daylesford, a town called Ballan, then on to Bannockburn, and back to Bacchus Marsh, which is where I started from. Now, the reason I was down there was I went to visit my son, and we decided that we would go on this Black Dog ride. So let me tell you a bit about the Black Dog ride first of all. The term Black Dog, I believe, is credited to former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, the World War II Prime Minister of England, or of the United Kingdom, who referred to seeing the black dog when he suffered from bouts of depression. Other people who suffer from depression also refer to seeing the black dog. The Black Dog ride came about because the person who started the ride, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but anyway, he had a friend who took his own life, and the gentleman who started the Black Dog ride decided he had to do something about this, and he had to raise awareness of suicide among men, especially young men. And so he started this one-day ride, and legend has it that he had a black dog that used to ride on his motorcycle with him, that was called Winston. So the logo of the Black Dog ride is a little black plush toy, I think they call him, stuffed toy dog, that has a name tag, Winston. So what happens with these Black Dog rides, they're a one-day event. They're held all over Australia on around this weekend in March. I think it must be the third weekend in March, and they're held at various locations, and somebody's obviously in charge of organising and liaises with the police and the council and all the various authorities that need to be involved. And people who want to ride on it, who want to take part in the ride, they register. You can either do that online or you can do it on the day, and you pay a fee. And most of the money from the fee, I imagine, goes to the Black Dog Institute, which is an institution that studies depression and looks into treatments and cures and causes and therapies and things like that. I imagine there's a small amount of money that's spent on administration. Every participant gets some stickers and a badge to put on their jacket and so on. You arrive at the appointed location at the appointed time, and there is a bit of a briefing about how the day will unfold and what's going to happen on the day, and then you set off. I first became aware of it when I was in Tasmania, and I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2020 when I did the Black Dog ride in Tasmania. And what happened there was that I was staying in Launceston, and the ride was to meet at Campbelltown, which is about 90 k's down the Midland Highway south of Launceston, and the riders came from the north and the south, and we all met at the Campbelltown showground, and I guess stood around and kicked tyres and swapped stories and so on. And then at the appointed time, it was sort of saddle up, stands up, and away we go. The local police officer, or one of the local police officers, came out and held up the traffic so that I guess about 100 bikes that day could get out of the showground, ride down the main street of Campbelltown for about a couple of 100 kilometres and make a left turn on the Lake Leak Highway and keep going until they got to the east coast, make another left turn and go to the town of Bicheno, where lunch was served, and then everybody sort of dispersed and went their own way home. Some people obviously went south, some people went back the way they came, some other people went up the coast and then came up into Launceston and other places like that through the mountains. So it was quite a good ride, an enjoyable ride that day. I went on my Suzuki Bergman that day, and I became aware of it again this year through Facebook or something like, I think it was Facebook, and I sent my son in Victoria a link and said, why don't you go on this ride? There was no ride in Goulburn that day, or in anywhere around Goulburn, so he said, well, why don't you come down and do it with me? And I couldn't think of a reason not to, so I did. So anyway, we assembled at the North Ballarat football ground, and by my estimation, there was about 100 bikes, mostly I would have said American bikes, that is Harley Davidsons and Indians, mostly the cruisers. There were a few Japanese cruisers, Kawasaki Voyagers and things like that. It's a Yamaha V-Star, a Triumph Rocket 3, some European Tours, BMW types, some Japanese sports bikes, and a few three-wheelers. So there was myself and another person riding Spider RTs, and a woman or a female rider on a Riker, which is a sort of cut-down version of the Spider. And there was a fellow who had a traditional trike with the two wheels at the back and the front and the single wheel at the front. I was talking to him. I made a video about where I photographed a lot of the different bikes and I put it up on my channel, so you may have seen that. And I was talking to that fellow. His bike was all airbrushed in a Shrek theme from the movie Shrek. And I was talking to him about the concerns about those bikes have a tendency to lift in certain circumstances. And I thought it was a bit of an urban myth, even though I'd seen video of it on Facebook myself, YouTube. And he said, yes, it had happened to him a couple of times when he'd made a right turn and gone around a corner too fast and gunned it too much. I think that's mainly because the weight of the bike is all at the back. The engine is at the back and the transmission's at the back behind the rider and behind the pillion. So obviously there's not much at the front of the bike. Now, in comparison, the Spider, which has two wheels at the front, it has a much shorter wheelbase for one thing, but secondly, it has the weight sort of distributed over the engine is underneath the rider and over towards the front of the bike, although there is some weight in the transmission, I guess, and the belt drive and so on behind the rider. So what happened on this day is we were given a bit of a briefing about where we were going and so on, and then it was mount up and right out of the sports ground car park. The people who had organised it were sufficiently prepared to be able to have, and you might see this in the video as it goes through, that come to roundabouts and major intersections and changes of direction and so on, that they had people stopping there to hold up the traffic so all the bikes could get through at once. And they had people pointing in the direction in case you got lost or in case you were too far behind the rest of the pack to know where they were going and so on. So I thought that part of it was all well organised. We were given some sort of briefing about how to ride in a pack, and I've never, except for the ride I did in did in Tasmania, I've never ridden in a pack before, never ridden with more than 2 or 3 people before. So some information there was quite handy, and it was suggested to us that obviously you obey all the road rules and you take notice of all the signs that you see on the roads and advisory speed signs and that sort of thing, but also that you don't overtake people. So you tend to get your position in the pack and then you stay in that position in the pack. And that's handy in certain ways, but you can see the two guys in front of me for most of the video. They're riding almost side by side with the guy in the black jacket just a little behind the guy in the orange vest, but still riding side by side a lot of the time. And that's handy and okay, but if you happen to get the left-hand side of the pair there and you're on the edge of the road and the road is uneven, or there are potholes or broken shoulders or something, you get the raw end of the stick, for example. So the guy on the outside has probably got to be aware of that and shift over a little bit towards the centre line to give you a little bit more room and to give you room to negotiate those tricky parts. Now, as I said, I haven't ridden in a pack this big before, except the one ride in Launceston. But my son and I had determined from the beginning that we would be towards the back of the pack. So the only people behind us were the tail rider and a few other people who were sort of responsible for the ride. And we'd done that because we didn't want to get caught up in the pack anywhere and sort of get stuck in it, and also because we wanted to give people in front of us plenty of room. Now, you may not be able to see it terribly clearly in this video, but the fellow in the orange vest ahead of me, he was on an L plate, and it looked as if he was riding the maximum size bike that he could get away with. I said by the sound of it, I think it was a Harley, maybe a 500, 550, whatever it is that they Harley, or maybe a 650 with ape hanger handlebars. And I felt there were a couple of times when he was probably struggling with that bike. But more important than that, I wanted to give him sufficient room. So if I was behind him, I was far enough behind him not to spook him and not to get him concerned about somebody getting too close to him when he had to stop or had to make a sudden manoeuvre that was unexpected. So I hung back a lot of the time and kept what I hoped was a good distance between him and myself, so that there was no concerns from him about the bloke behind me's getting too close. I've got to speed up to get away from him, or I wish he'd slow down and give me more space, or anything like that. I got to thinking a bit about problems that people encounter in cornering and taking curves and bends in the road while I was watching this guy, and I thought, there are a lot of factors that go into that, a lot of things that determine how successful you're going to be when you enter a corner and come out of the corner. Some of those are to do with the conditions, or a lot of those are to do with the conditions. And I think that the first tip, and I'm not a motorcycle instructor, I don't have any qualifications in that, but I've ridden a lot, and I watched this guy, and I've watched myself do things and think, you took the wrong line there, you did the wrong thing there, and hopefully I've learned from that. So I think there are lots of things to learn, and some of it starts with the conditions, and that is you ride to the weather conditions. So if it's cloudy and overcast, or a bit dark or gloomy like it is in parts of this ride, you adjust your riding a little bit. You ride at a different speed than if it's a bright sunny day. If the road is wet, of course, you ride at a different speed, and you take a different attitude into the ride than you do if it's a dry road. If the road has lots of twists and turns in it, you get a lot of fun out of riding in those twists and turns, but you have to take a different attitude than if you're on a dead straight road. So you have to ride to the conditions of the road, the weather conditions. You have to ride to the conditions, your own capabilities. Obviously, a person who's ridden 300,000 or 400,000 Ks on a bike is more experienced than a person who's ridden 50. So your own capabilities and the capabilities of the bike that you're on. So are those things that you bring to the table, or if you like, bring to the bike before you start. So when you come to a curve in the road or a bend, you often see those, in Australia anyway, you see those yellow signs with the chevrons on them to indicate which way the curve is going. But you also see a yellow advisory sign that will point in the direction that the curve is going and have a number underneath it, which suggests to you that you should take that curve or take that bend at that speed. So if it says 70 but the speed limit on the road is 100, then it's advising you that as you go around this curve or bend that you should slow down to 70 kilometres an hour. Now the problem with that is, it's good to see that sign and it's useful to take notice of it, but you can't slow down when you're in the curve. You can't brake when you're in the curve. Braking works best when you're going in a straight line. So if you're already into the curve and bend and you decide to grab hold of the front brake or put your foot on the back brake, or both, or in the case of my Spider, you touch the foot brake and it activates all three, your braking is going to be less successful because the bike is now curving when it wants to stop in a straight line. So you need to brake before you come into the curve. You need to change down before you come into the curve, so make sure you're in the right gear, and then you need to pick the line that you're going to take around the curve. And the best advice you can get there is do your best to stay away from the centre line. And the reason for that is if you get too close to the centre line, there's a tendency for you to overshoot and perhaps cross that centre line on the road, the lane marking, or if there's somebody coming the other way who's making the same mistake that you have and overshot and taken a bad line, and they overshoot the centre line, they're going to collect you. So approach the curve with confidence, look to where you want to go, turn your head and have your head pointed where the curve is going and where you want to go and the exit point you want to get to, but slow down before you get into the curve, brake before you get into the curve, change down before you get into the curve, and then you can accelerate your way out of the curve or out of the bend with a fair degree of confidence. So those are things to sort of think about, and it got me thinking about, as I say, watching this fellow in front of me, and I also thought in his case that the ape hanger handlebars, we're not sure what ape hanger handlebars are. They're those handlebars that are quite high and you end up with your hands above shoulder, or at or above shoulder height. And if you think about it, after even a short period of riding, that's going to become fairly uncomfortable. Your shoulders are being used to hold your arms up so you can grab onto the handlebars, and that becomes quite tiring. But not only that, it becomes difficult to manoeuvre the bike. There are specifications in Australia, I don't know exactly what they are, but I know that they exist, about how high handlebars can be and how wide they can be. And they're not based on just being narky, they're based on engineers and various people like that who make those sorts of decisions, saying this is the ideal height and width for bars for you to be able to safely control this bike in all the circumstances that you are likely to encounter on the road. All right, well, so we've gone through just a few minutes back, we went through the little town, I think that's probably best to describe it, of Creswick, and we're on the way out of Creswick at this point in the video towards the next town, which is Daylesford. Daylesford is well known as part of the spa country in Victoria, lots of health resorts and spas and that sort of thing in that area, and we'll get to that in the next part of the video. The road, as you can see here, is in pretty good condition. It's either single lane either way, or in some places dual carriageway, well marked and pretty well maintained. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. I hope you've learned something about the Black Dog, and you might be interested in taking up that ride next year if you see it advertised in your area. I'll talk to you in the next video.